Welcome to the Deconstructed Woman podcast, a podcast about breaking down barriers between women, exploring and sharing perspectives of each individual woman's experience, and discovering what we have in common and what makes us different. Hosted by Elisa Marie and Joji. Welcome back to the Deconstructed Woman podcast. So recently, Joji sent over an article that we started to talk about, and I'm going to let her tell you a little bit more about the article. But the concept was this idea of October theory, in which you reflect on the year and kind of looking at the resolutions you made last year and into January, and then how far you've come and how far you want to go. And really thinking about starting now in October, which we're almost at the end of, kind of easing into what are some goals that you have as you kind of go into the next 3 months and the end of this year. And what habits do you want to start now so that you can start building that in for next year? So I think this is a really neat concept. I think in some ways I've been seeing this kind of buzz around in various people that I'm following. They've talked about, hey, assess where you're at right now. It's October. We have 3 more months. Where do you want to be by the end of the year, and where do you want to be starting next year? So, Joji, you have kind of the citation for the article, but let's talk a little bit about what they're saying and how this came about.
Sure, happy to. So, the name of the article is How to Change Your Life with October Theory by a Psychologist, and is written by Mark Travers, who is writing an article in Forbes, and it was published October 22nd, 2024. So, a pretty recent article. And really, the article says, in a longer form, exactly what Alyssa alluded to. They talk about fall as a time of transition, and that it's a great time to start thinking about everything you wanted to do in the year, you had planned to do, and take stock of where that, how that then took place. And so really you're talking about identifying what still needs to be worked on and setting goals to be able to do that for the new year. And so when they break it down, they just start talking about the fact that October is really the time, like it is in fall. You see the transition of season colors, things like that. So it's a good time to look at the last 9 months and evaluate what were the goals you set this year, how much progress did you make, and what still needs to be done. And they introduced this new word, and I'm going to do my best to describe it or say it, pronounce it correctly. It's called eustress, which equals good stress. And what they really talk about is introspection. What is it that you wish you had done? And also acknowledge what good things you have done. So this is not a time to beat yourself up for what remains undone, but really to look at what the goals were and evaluate how far you've come in that. Then in November, you pick up the pieces of what has to be still worked on and you set some SMART goals. And many of us have used SMART goals in our workplace with performance or development goals. We use it in a lot of different aspects of life. And for those of you like myself who didn't remember what the acronym stands for, SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. And so those are the components of what every goal should have so that there is these variables to really think it through and make it doable in the time frame that you set for yourself. December, then, the final month of this evaluation transition period, is really about turning goals into habits. And one of the things that this article spoke about was the fact that most of us generally think about the fact that it takes 21 days to form a habit. And they actually said that research shows that it really is more, anywhere from 18 to 254 days, and that 21 days doesn't work for everyone based on the fact that people differ when it comes to their behavior, their their motivation, and their circumstances. So things could stop, things could automatically change in the middle of your process. And then, there's no need to feel like a failure if you're working as hard as you can within the circumstances that you find yourself in. And so they really talk about the fact that when you take this period to reflect, the likelihood of being able to have more achievable goals and realistic goals is much higher. And that this is not about berating yourself or punishing yourself because you're not meeting the goals. It's really being able to live life on life's terms, given the fact that lots of things happen that we can't predict or expect. And so it seems like a very holistic, nurturing kind of concept. I'd never heard of it before. That's what Alyssa and I talked about before we jumped on the podcast, was just the fact that this is a new idea to us, but apparently it's viral on TikTok. Ryan Seacrest talked about it on his podcast. And Alyssa said that a lot of people that she's following have also started hinting about the same kind of idea, that this is a good time to start reviewing your goals. And so, Alyssa, what do as I described the article and summarized it, what are the key points that stood out to you?
Well, I think that you kind of mentioned it, the idea that this is not a time to criticize yourself or say like, oh, I didn't do this again. Like I had this goal and I didn't meet it, but to almost have some self-compassion and acknowledge that, okay, maybe it didn't pan out the way that I wanted to, but now we can restart. I think that that concept in of itself really aligns with a lot of things that we've talked about: self-care, compassion, being mindful, those sorts of things. So I think that that's a really good reminder of, what, we're going into this kind of change of season, uh you know daylight savings time, all of these things are shifting now, and that doesn't have to be a discouraging thing. It can be a really positive one. It could be, a time to reflect. And I like the idea of positive stress. I think that that's something, I think I don't know. I don't think I fully wrap my head around it, you know, completely, but the idea of, having that there to kind of motivate you and push you in the right direction is a really nice concept. And then I think the SMART goals, I mean, as you were reading them off, I was thinking, okay, like what do I don't know. I'm still rummaging through what were my goals last year. I don't even think I wrote them down. So I probably need
It's
to get a
so
little bit more organized, but
It's so funny because I thought the same thing as we were talking about this. I thought, "What do I even did I even make goals last year?" Like,
right.
I was thinking to myself, like, "What are they?" Like, I don't even remember. I have to unearth them from somewhere.
Right.
If
I
if
hope
in
I
fact
wrote
I
them
had
down
any.
maybe like in my notes on my phone. Like I'm gonna pull that up and just be like, hey, did you document what you wanted to do? I mean, I think that there's like the usual typical goals that everyone has. Like I want to lose weight and I want to I mean, everyone knows my goal is to declutter my home. And it's interesting because actually I'm taking a side note, but this is something that came up to me because I was reading an article about uh, you know, people were saying that if you have a goal and you haven't been able to achieve it, maybe you need to change the goal. And that was something that I was like, huh, that's a really interesting concept. So it ties in with this because my goal was I have this section of my room, my bedroom, that I really, really want to declutter. But I haven't been able to do it. And so every time I walk into my room, I see it and I'm like, oh, like this section of my room just drives me nuts. Like I wish I could have time. And I've asked for like, my husband to take all the kids out of the house so I can have 20 minutes to just focus on this one section. But even when he's done that, other things have taken up my time or distracted me or whatever. Like I just can't get to it. And I was like, well, maybe the goal isn't to tackle the whole corner all at once. Like maybe it would just be like taking one item out a day, like breaking it down. Um, I haven't, figured it out fully, but I think that maybe the goal, so it goes back to the SMART goals, it needs to be really a reasonable, achievable goal that I can measure. And maybe that bigger goal is just not it. So I think that there's things to talk about that might be like another conversation, but that was just one that popped into I'm sitting in my bedroom, I'm looking at this corner that drives me nuts. And I'm like, oh, maybe if I just move a couple pieces each day by December, that corner would be taken care of. I don't know. because it's kind of the remnants of when I used to have a desk in our room, which I've sold the desk, I don't know, probably 9 months ago. So 9 months ago, I wanted to get rid of all this stuff and I just haven't been able to. So I think that that's part of it too, is making sure that if you're not able to achieve that goal, maybe reassessing where you want to go from there.
Yeah, and you're right. This could be a whole topic in itself because as you were talking about your corner bedroom, I was thinking about my wall garden cleanup. And every year it seems to feel more and more like a burden and like my garden has grown, but it really hasn't. And so I was at the same exact spot. I'd been busy the last couple weekends. Weekends is usually when I get a lot of that done. And so one day, I thought to myself, if I could just do a portion of this garden one day after work, because there's only so much light now. And so I only have like a good 45 minutes to an hour to get out there. And instead of thinking like, oh, I have to do that whole front garden, I just thought if I could just do from here to here in that 45 minutes. And really, once you get out there, it doesn't take very long. So you could actually do half the garden in 45 minutes. But it was almost like, um, to set, like you were saying, achievable goals. And then the weirdest part about it, and I don't know why this doesn't like get me up and moving, is I felt so good once I did it because I could stop thinking about it and stop worrying about it. And so I think that then leads into a little bit of a broader discussion about good stress because I looked at the article while you were talking about, you're trying to wrap your head around it. And so what they talk about in that is it's really taking stress and sort of turning it on its side and saying it's the positive conceptualization of anxiety. So it's looking at the anxiety that motivates us to do something instead of attacking ourselves. And so it's more of a motivator and does not inhibit. And so it fills us with a sense of hope, positivity, and vigor. And so it's I think it's like almost like a double-edged sword because the more you worry about it, it becomes bad stress. But if you can get yourself to do it, then it ends up reinforcing that behavior because of the release that you felt, because that's what I felt. So I actually did it one day and I was like, okay, that wasn't bad. It felt good getting in a little bit of sun, like breaking away from work and being able to put my workday behind me because now I'm all in, I'm all here doing this. And I felt productive and I, ticked off a little part of that garden and it just energized me for the rest of the day. And I think that's the part that is the good stress part of it. But I know that I suspect for you in your situation with four children and a busy household and just a very, very active day and how you said that something more important might have interrupted that 20 minutes that you got. I think that's the circumstance piece of this theory as well. And making goals that are reasonable is that as things happen, you can't punish yourself for not for getting the 20 minutes and then not being able to accomplish the goal that you set out to do because something interfered with that. And so it's also learning to be kinder to ourselves. And I think in the stage of life you are in, it's a little that sense of compassion is a little bit harder to come by when that 20 minutes is so precious and there's so many things competing for that 20 minutes. And so I think you're a great example of somebody who has to um, redefine maybe what measurable, achievable, what those SMART goals are. Because what was a SMART goal to us in our 20s when we were in college and didn't have the number of distractions that you currently have in your life is not the same circumstance as, what we like to think of ourselves. And so it's almost like you have to put those filters out there, spouse, after work, before work, whatever, and then say, okay, what's a reasonable goal to be able to get that done? And so it might actually help us look at these things in a different way that's more productive and kind to ourselves. So I think I think we covered the good stress and we covered the SMART goals. And of course, the last part is always the hardest. So what do you think about, Alyssa, what do you think about having like going from 21 days to 254 days and being able to set goals. I guess the critical voice in my head says, isn't that just more time not to do what you have to do? But what do you think about that?
Well, I think I kinda had, like, a reaction initially of, "No, 21 is good." Because, if I say, "Oh, I have to do this for 250 days," I don't know anybody who's gonna be like, "Oh, yeah," like, you know, let me jump on that. So I think that the initial, like, okay, it depends on the habit. So let me back up for a minute. Because I think it depends on the habit. Because if it's something like, um I don't know, going for a walk, every morning or something like that, and if I can do that for 21 days, I'm likely gonna continue because it felt good, and maybe I won't do it every single day after that or, it will shift, but I think that that main goal of trying to do that for a period of time and seeing if that works and trial and error and kind of trying new things, I think that that's where we should focus. But if it's an actual, like something you want to do long term, I think that for me, I work really well with the short term goals of I'm going to do this for a short period of time, see if it works, reassess, and try something else and pivot if it doesn't, versus I need to do this for, a long time. Like I know that there's been times where I've done habits for I think I've been able to do them for like 2 to 3 months, and then they taper off, and it's interesting to me certain things that motivate me or don't motivate me, and the things that stuck and the things that didn't stick. I mean, everybody's so different, but I think that that initial goal of, "Okay, I'm gonna try to start a new habit." I've gone so far as to download, like, habit trackers and apps. I can't remember the ones I've used in the past, but, I mean, there's all sorts of apps out there, but I had one that, like, every time I brushed my teeth at night, I clicked the little box and would be like, "Good job, you did this," like, because I had gotten into a habit of just, like, brushing my teeth in the morning and in the midday, but not at night because I'm exhausted and I have 4 children. And so well, that's now, this was a while ago. But needless to say, it was like, "Good job." So I'd, like, click the thing, and it only took me about 20 days, 20, 21 days, whatever it was, to, like, solidify that habit so I no longer needed the habit tracker, right? So certain things like that might only be a short term to get yourselves into that habit, whereas, like, longer term ones, longer lifestyle changes, I think we have to go back to those, smart goals. We're not going to say, I'm going to lose 50 pounds. Like maybe the goal is, again, walk 1 to 2 times a week or something. Like I think you have to really try to start the habit and then reassess and go from there versus I'm going to do this for 250 days because that to me seems overwhelming.
Yeah, I will say the one thing that the article didn't say is that you have to do it every single day. Like in the 21-day rule, it really is to create a habit takes 21 days, so you have to do it consistently. There's no mention of how consistently you do it. It's just that they said that it takes about an average of 66 days for somebody to really get into the groove of doing it over that period of time on average. And so I find, it's good and bad. I totally understand what you're saying. Like 21 days seems a lot more reasonable because it feels more doable. Whereas I feel like the more time we have, doesn't that just allow for that goal to go by the wayside? For instance, the fact that you and I can't remember our goals from this year. And so it sort of feels like if you have that much time, it gets further and further back on your to do list, and then you totally forget about it, by the mid year or whatever. The one thing I wanted to talk about, you know, before we end this conversation was that it does feel like doing a review seems to be something that is also sort of current or on point with a lot of different discussions. One of my new favorite podcasts, and if you guys haven't heard about it, I definitely recommend it, is called Wiser Than Me, and it's by Julia Louis Dreyfus. And her whole goal is to talk to women that she considers wiser than herself. And the people on the conversation that she's talked to are anywhere from mid 60s to 90, I think might have been the oldest person she spoke to so far. And one of the conversations she had, it was actually her first interview of her podcast, was with Jane Fonda. And as they were talking about like what Jane Fonda had learned in her life, one of the things she spoke about, and I think Julia's on season 3, so this is a couple of years ago. And Jane Fonda said that, she's taken every like 20 years as a period of her life that she does a review. And that as she was getting into her 80s, she started to think about, you know, taking stock of every 2 decades or parts of her life and saying, okay, so what have I learned? And what do I want to spend the last years of my life focusing on? And it really struck a chord with me. It struck a chord with me to say, you know what? What a gift I received by being able to hear that, because now I don't want to wait till I'm 80 to do that. I want to do that now because who knows how much time I have. Jane Fonda is lucky to be living in her 80s, but I'm not guaranteed that. And so at 56, I better start doing my own review because I don't want to run out of time. I want to be able to use the time that's in front of me since I have it, since my childbearing and child rearing days are behind me. This is really my time, and it really made me think about a lot of things. It made me think about how much time we spend trying to meet other people's expectations. These are all the themes that the women have talked about in the two seasons I've listened to so far. Really looking at your life and evaluating it, realizing how much of our time we have spent trying to make other people happy and redefining what that is for ourselves. And almost this feeling like we give ourselves permission, or maybe it's that the people who judge us have passed on and are no longer around. But there's also some ownership of the fact that you can take control of your life. So I don't know how that fits with this whole thing. I think it's tied to the fact that, they were talking about doing a review as they get older, and review is really the main concept of this conversation, I think. But I thought, man, if I can start my review period now and really think about what is that going to mean for my next 20 years, then I feel like I have a leg up on, a person who started doing that in their 70s or 80s. So I know that this is really far away from you, Alyssa. I know that you've got many years before you're even 56, but what do you think about even older women looking at, not just, I don't mean only older women, but like women looking at their life and saying, yeah, these are some of the things that I've thought about. How does that strike you?
I mean, I think you can do that at any age, and I think that it's like that. It goes back to this whole conversation of the October theory, the idea of just stepping back and looking at where you are and where you want to be, and what's important to you. I think that I don't think that we do it enough. I think that so many times we get caught in the hustle and bustle of life and the chaos, and however that looks for each individual listening to this podcast. But I think that so often we forget to pause and say, huh, how am I doing? Am I, what's really important to me? Because again, I go back to this corner in my bedroom, like it stresses me out that I can't find the time to do this one thing that, I see every single day. Like that to me is like, oh, oh, I have this 5 minutes. I should be doing that corner of my bedroom. But the reality is, maybe not. Maybe I should be spending time with my kids. Like, maybe that's my priority. And that's what I do instead. And I shouldn't be upset or, berate myself for doing something that in this phase of my life, it, you know, is healthy and appropriate. And someday when I retire, like maybe that corner will take me 20 minutes. And then what am I going to complain about for the next 20 years? Because that will have been, it'll probably take me about 20 years until I can get to that corner. But when I do, because my kids have grown up and all of those things, like that's not going to be that important to me. So I think that maybe, really assessing where we're at. And if you're doing a good job, give yourself that credit and let that go to the wayside. I think that it's that reassessment however often it feels comfortable for you, whether it's every 3 months or once a year. I would say that it's beneficial to anybody, especially, as you're maybe starting your career in life and trying to think about where I want to be in 5 and 10 years, or midlife, like I think we are, or, later on in life. I think that any one of those times can be, really monumental for assessing where you're at and where you want to go.
Yeah, so I think this has been a great conversation in terms of really this is the perfect time in of the year, which is probably why this article was published in October. But yeah, it's really given me a lot of hope and a lot of energy in terms of saying, okay, let's shore up what still needs to be done and create a plan that can make it happen in 2025. And really, I think instead of us falling into the new year after 2 months of just crazy busy times. And that's the other thing I thought about is that, we lose ourselves in the holidays. I would say once, November 1st hits with daylight savings time and, you're already anticipating your holiday planning. And you had talked about that a little bit before we got online. Like, all of a sudden, like the holidays become the focus of this time, not reevaluating what this year has done for us. And I think the bad part about that is that then the new year is here before we know it. We're exhausted from 2 months of holidays and everything that goes along with that, the shopping, the wrapping, the family time, the traveling, all of that. And then when you hit New Year's Day, it's like, yeah, it's the dawn of a new year, but you're exhausted, not only if you stayed up past midnight the night before, but also because of this ongoing marathon of, holiday and family time and celebration. So I almost am more hopeful looking at what I can think about and plan for the next 2 months about my goals instead of almost like, oh, it's time to make some resolutions. Not that I really do that anymore, but the fact of the matter is that I really do feel like the new year takes me by surprise because it's here all of a sudden. And now I've got 2 months to anticipate that. And that feels really manageable for me. So I don't know how you feel about that. But if you want to respond to my thoughts and close us out, that'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, I think anytime that we shift the focus from the holiday hustle bustle to ourselves, I think that's beneficial. So if you have enjoyed this conversation and want to let us know your thoughts, feel free to email us at thedeconstructedwoman@gmail.com. You can join us in our Facebook group where we post questions and the newer episodes as they come out. Or feel free to just send us a message here on the platform uh, to let us know you were listening in. We love to hear from you and kind of get your feedback. And hopefully, this will open up a conversation for you and your friends and loved ones as you go into the fall months and what that looks like. So, thank you for listening in, and we hope to be in contact soon.
Thank you for listening to our podcast, The Deconstructed Woman. If you like this podcast, please share it with your friends, rate this episode, or subscribe to be notified of all new content. We want to hear from you, our listener. Do you have thoughts on the discussions we're having? Want to share topic suggestions? Or want to join us for a topic that you're passionate about? Contact us at our email address, thedeconstructedwoman@gmail.com.